Yellen warns China industry ramp up is distorting world economy. When I saw this article, it just really shocked me that there would be such boldness that you would go to another country and try to tell them that their attempt to grow their economy, their attempt to industrialize, their attempt to expand the wealth and the viability of their people would somehow be a threat to the world economy. This was shocking to me. But then I saw when that was the first article, but then I began to see tons of articles that followed the same thing, the same line of thinking, the same train of thought. The Wall Street Journal published this: China is making too much stuff, and other countries are worried. How could you say that a country is making too much stuff? Is that a sign that you should be making more things, or is that a sign that there's something wrong with your economy? But rather, the issue isn't in looking at self, is in placing blame or saying that something's wrong with what China is doing by trying to expand their industrial sector, by trying to expand their technology sector, by trying to grow their economy and increase the status of living, the quality of life of their people. Somehow that's a threat to those in the West. And my thinking is, hey, if you're losing a game, you don't blame the opponent. What you do is you learn how to play better. You don't go out and try to change the rules. And that's one of the things that has created this backlash to the West. It's not inherent that people just don't like the US or people just don't like the G7 or don't like the West. But it's this notion that when you're losing the game, instead of trying to play better, you change the rules. China and US hold economic talks as trade issues heat up on the campaign trail. And I really think that much of this has to do with campaigning. I don't really think this is a serious attempt to engage China. I think this is an attempt to win some points on the political trail, to win some points because they know that the administration is not doing well in the polls. And as a result, the Biden administration is grasping at straws. They know that when they get into the general election, this trade issue is going to come up. But regardless of which side, whether it's Biden or Trump that talk about it, the reality is neither one of them are going to be able to stop China. For a reason, the West is afraid of China's economic growth. That's what I want to cover today. I want to give you 4 reasons that they have this fear mongering, this intent, and it turns into sometimes a form of hatred or animosity towards China and towards any country that is trying to advance. You saw this during the beginning of the Ukraine-Russia war, where there were constant attacks against India, constant attacks against them purchasing oil and natural resources and pursuing their own economic interests, not as a proxy state, not as an underling, but as a country with pride, with objectives, with economic concerns and aspirations all their own. We saw this kind of bullying that was going on because India wouldn't jump in line. Let me give you the first reason why the West is afraid of China's economic growth and capacity, and that has to do with China 2025. China 2025 is seen as a threat to global trade. And it's seen as a threat to global trade because, once again, you have this notion of, instead of trying to compete, instead of continuing to wipe out waste, fraud, and abuse within their governments, and to try to create economic systems that grow and benefit the citizens of their nations, what we see is a consistent propping up of that which is failing in order to protect the economic interest of the Davos crowd, the elites in the West. We see a consistent propping up of these things. And what China is doing is China is saying, we're going to invest. We're not going to get into all of this type of waste, fraud, and abuse and propping up this economic interest, this political party, or this particular special interest group. We're going to invest and be consistent in growing our economy. And through growth, we will achieve all of our economic, military, quality of life, all of our true aspirations as a people. Listen to what the Council on Foreign Relations says. China's industrial policy is aimed at rapidly expanding its high-tech sectors and developing its advanced manufacturing base. But President Trump and other leaders of industrial democracy see the plan as a threat. This is not a new plan. This plan came out under the Trump administration. And now all of a sudden, the Biden administration, 4 years later, is now sending Yellen to China to try to dissuade them from this plan 2025, which they implemented years ago. And it has been moving at pace, and it has been a success. It has catapulted Chinese industries, their EV industry. It's catapulted their AI. It has catapulted their robotics industry into not just a competitive, but not parity in some instances, and far outpacing the entire, not just the U.S., but the entire West. The entire G7 has been outpaced in industrial capacity as a result of the launch of this plan 2025. When the real estate sector in China began to decline, the catalyst for economic growth and GDP stimulation shifted from its real estate into a revamping and a doubling down on industrial capacity and on technology. So let's look at this. What is China 2025? Released in 2015, Made in China 2025 is a government's 10-year plan to update China's manufacturing base by rapidly developing 10 high-tech industries. Chief among these are electric cars and other new energy vehicles, next-generation information technology and telecommunications, and advanced robotics and artificial intelligence. 10 years ago, they started this. 10 years ago. That's foresight. That's the type of foresight the West used to have. When the West used to build big things, when the West had great manufacturing and automaking, and it's not to say that those things don't still exist in the West, but it's the focus is no longer on building great things, on investing, smart investing, strategic investing. It's on propping up the economic interest of a few and using the political system to create a division between the haves and have-nots and to widen the economic divisions within society. That seems to be the political modus operandi, the focus in the West, whereas in China, foresight, investment, development seem to be their focus. And you can't be angry. You can't be mad. It's not like a Monopoly game where when you're losing, you turn up the board. That's happened far too often when it comes to the global South seeking their own aspirations. France and the Sahel region and other countries throughout the Africa. Whenever the global South seeks to achieve greater independence and economic prosperity, it happened in Liberia. It happened all over. It happened repeatedly over and over again in Haiti. Haiti is not what it is by accident. Haiti exists as a result of constant external interference, constant meddling, constant military action, occupation. It hit every time they've tried to achieve their own economic interests and plot a path forward. There was this constant interference and meddling. And China is far too big for that. And by the way, Russia is too. We see this as the same pattern happening over and over again. When there's a threat, instead of trying to compete, instead of trying to be better, we've got to change the rules. We've got to turn over the table and enable those who cannot compete to somehow maintain their power and their hold, their grip over the world economy. And it's not working. Look at this. This is a continuation on the Council on Foreign Relations. This is their article. The Chinese government has launched Made in China 2025, a state-led industry policy industrial policy that seeks to make China dominant in global high-tech manufacturing. The program aims to use government subsidies, mobilize state-owned enterprises, and pursue intellectual property acquisition to catch up with and then surpass Western technological powers in advanced industries. For the United States and other major industrialized democracies, however, these tactics not only undermine Beijing's stated adherence to international trade rules, but also pose a security risk. Washington argues that the policy relies on discriminatory treatment of foreign investment, forced technology transfers, intellectual property theft, and cyber espionage, practices that have encouraged the president, Donald Trump, because this is an older article, but the fact is this was going on. This has been going on. This is not new. The 2025 started in 2015. It was a 10-year plan. And while a lot of people were asleep at the wheel, now all of a sudden, Biden administration hasn't talked about this in 4 years. 4 years they've gone and not spoken about this at all. Now all of a sudden, it's become a problem. It's become a problem now that we're in 2024. The time to ramp up and to create a US 2025, a France 2025, a Germany 2025. The time to focus on these industries were 10 years ago. The time to focus on this was 4 years ago. The time to actually dig in the West. But in the interim, what have they been up to? Propping up failing companies, extorting the people with ridiculous tax schemes and other policies that didn't benefit. And now all of a sudden we're sending Janet Yellen. Janet Yellen is going to go to China and tell them to stop. Well, the train has left the station. This is 9 years into a 10-year plan, and you're going to go in and somehow get them to turn around. Let's look at this. This is what they're afraid about. This is the reasons they're afraid. The world shares of gross production. When you look at this, China is in red. Look at the other countries when it comes to manufacturing. When you combine the top 10, what you see in this chart on the right is that China has caught up to the industrial capacity of the top 10. That's staggering that one country has caught up to the manufacturing capacity of the top. That's what they're afraid of. That's what this is about. And you think that sending these envoys over is going to stop? Look at the chart in a pie chart. World's biggest manufacturing economy. Look at China. 35% gross production, value added 29%. When you look at that, this is what's going on. This is what the fear is. And my question is, where have you been? Have you been asleep at the wheel? Where have you been? This is not something that just happened. Plan 2025 started in 2015. Where has the West been? Where have their priorities and their focus been? Over the last decade, where has the investment into community, investment into technology, investment into education? But we've been preoccupied with all types of social issues, all types of infighting, all types of racial and gender issues, and all of this other nonsense, while the world is not only catching up, but passing, in some instances, passing the West by. Look at this. U.S.-China dependencies. What you see is an asymmetry as it relates to the dependency. There was a time when China was completely dependent on the U.S. and its allies. But over time, that need for dependency has begun to decline, where we're more dependent on them than they are on us. Look at the chart on the left. You see how the dependency is rising in the blue, and the dependency in China is seeking a total independency from the West. This same thing that happened with Ukraine and Russia, it's happening with China and Taiwan. An alienation, an alienating the Chinese from the Western economies, alienating them politically and geopolitically because they want a sphere of influence. These great powers want their backyards to be theirs. They don't want how would the United States feel if Russia was operating in Mexico and in Canada? How would the US feel if China was operating in Mexico? These great powers feel that they should have a sphere of influence. And the encroachment on that sphere of influence is what's causing the geopolitical tensions and upending the global economic order. And as a result, China is making moves to free itself to become independent of the US. So is Russia. So is the global South. It's this adventurism. You can say whatever you want about the Biden administration and the Trump administration and the Obama administration. But one of the things that is clear is that there was a difference between all of these administrations as it pertains to engaging in this adventurism, this using the military to foster or to promote economic expansion, this creating wars and sending troops overseas to this thing or that thing to try to control the globe. It has not worked well geopolitically. And we're starting to see this coalition, this coalescing of forces coming around the world together to create a bipolar world to oppose, not just militarily, but to oppose economically some of the things that the West has been doing. U.S. raises overcapacity concerns in economic talks with China. The question is this: what is the concern? Is there a concern unless it's a situation where you realize that you're not competing? You bring your goods to market, we bring our goods to market, and we let the chips fall where they may. That's essentially how the economics works. And whoever has the better product, whoever has the cheaper product wins. Isn't that what capitalism is about? We hear all of the extolling of the virtues of capitalism when it's going in the West favor. But when it's not going in the West favor, we see a constant, let's change the rules, let's change the nature of the game, let's caricature people as stealing. Or don't you know that espionage is something that is done by companies across the countries and companies? Spying is something done by countries and companies across the world. But there's always this: when they do it, it's wrong. When we do it, it's right. That's the notion that we consistently are told. When they do something, it's bad, but when we do it, it's right. And I'd like to think that all of this is misplaced. Concerns over U.S. manufacturing and the trade deficit are misplaced. That's what the Cato Institute believes, and I think they're right. Because when you really look at it, U.S. escalates tech battle by cutting China off from AI chips. Once again, it's a misplaced focus. If you want to ward off a threat, become stronger. Not try to change the rules, not try to cheat your way in the first place, not try to manipulate the system through sanctions, through restrictions, through embargoes. That's a misplaced policy objective. That's not only conceding that you can't compete, but that's accepting a defeatist mindset. What should be happening is investment. What should be happening is pushing the manufacturing, the technology sector, the education sector. The education sector in the West is crumbling because it's too heavily geared on faulty tax schemes and trying to avoid investment and trying to invest based on race and politics and geography, instead of doubling down and ensuring that you are creating a class of young people that can come out and take the engineering jobs of the future. There are other political and social norms that are being reinforced through the education system to create winners and losers. And as a result, what we find is we're not producing enough of any of the major technologically sectors, people to go into those sectors to actually compete. The EU just got a step closer to hitting Chinese EVs with additional tariffs and may even apply them retroactively. Let's look at this. You're going to try to tariff your way into first place. When has that worked? Show me a system where you can use protectionism as a way to catch up in the areas where you're failing. Show me where that has truly and honestly worked. U.S. chip export ban is great news, says partner at Chinese tech investment fund. And I actually agree with this article. It's kind of weirdly worded, but essentially what they're saying is by doing this export ban, you're forcing China to innovate. See, that's the way you compete. You compete by innovation. You compete by being self-reliant. You compete by investment. You compete by eliminating fraud and not trying to award contracts based on who's buddy with who and who's in which office and who's elected to where. You do it based upon the needs of the whole, and that's what's distinguishing China from the West. Is they're going all in on their plan 2025. They're going all in on what they believe the future to hold, and they're not allowing individuals, politics, economic interest of this one or that one to interfere with their implementation of their plan. Whereas we're still playing games, but eventually you'll have to wake up because the game playing will come to an end. Let's look at the semiconductor industry. China's semiconductor industry advances despite U.S. export controls. Once again, they were forced because we wanted to change the rules. We wanted to win by turning the table over, by taking our ball and going home. But what we fail to realize is when you take your ball and go home, typically what happens is while you're sitting at the house, you look out the window and you see the boys on the playground playing with someone else's ball or creating their own ball. And the only thing you've done is isolate yourself. And that's essentially what happened with the semiconductor industry. China's pressed forward. They released new phones, new technology using equipment, some of which that was taken from U.S. manufacturers despite the export ban, but some of it which was developed domestically. U.S. microchip export controls imposed last year to freeze China's development of supercomputers used to develop nuclear weapons and artificial intelligence systems like ChatGPT are having only minimal effects on China's tech sector. So when it all came down to it, it didn't really harm China the way that we were told it was going to stop them in its tracks. Huawei, SMIC used U.S. tech to make advanced chips, Bloomberg reports. In the end, the technology is out there. In the end, they got lots of the technology through third parties. In the end, all of this effort to try to gain an advantage by gaming the global system has not worked, is not working. And if we're going to catch up, we got to readjust our value system and have a value that they had at one point where we were able to compete and we believed that the West could compete. This notion of protectionism has utterly and completely failed. China to give chip makers $27 billion to counter U.S. sanctions. Big fund. 3 will have further funding rounds. This is, once again, a notion that China is not going to sit idle. They're not going to sit on their hands. They're not going to just sit around and wait for the West to give them permission to develop their economies. They're not going to sit around and wait for the West to give them permission to increase their standard of living. They're going to go out, invest money where it's needed, and double down and put their emphasis, their energy, their strength in the right places. And as a result, what's going to happen is if the West continues to play the blame game, as the West continues to be focused on these other social nonsense issues and green, and there's nothing wrong with the green economy, but it can't be done in a way that destroys the economy itself. You're trying to save the planet, but you can't destroy the economy at the same time. China industrial robots. Let's look at this just briefly. China using industrial robots at 12 times U.S. rate. 12 times. You got that right. 12 times the U.S. rate. China rise of industrial robots. When we start talking about industrial robots and the use of high-tech manufacturing. See, their industrialization is being fueled by technology, the use of new technology in the industrial process. And as a result, it takes lots of investment, lots of man hours to create the type of factories that can compete in the emerging world. And that's not something that you can turn off and turn on the spigot. That's something you're going to have to be consistent with, committed to, in order to do over a long period of time. It's not just that the factories don't exist in the West, it's the fact that in order to create these types of factories, this isn't just put a bunch of people in and show them what to do. This is, you've got to develop the robotics industry, which requires lots of investment over decades. You've got to develop the technology, the software, the hardware to manage these robots, and then deploy them strategically within the industrial sector in order for them to yield the type of return. So if you fall behind, this is not something that you're going to be able to catch up on. We see all of the little cute images, they always try to show the cute images of the humanoid robots that are presented in China and are created there, all of the little funny household robots and entertaining. But while they were doing all of that, that was precursor. That was a part of the development of the interaction between humans and robots. That was part of the development of the technology and the software. And while we thought it was cute and we were ridiculing them, the next wave of robots that came out were fully industrial. And now all of a sudden there's a crisis afoot. These industrial robots, you're not going to be able to have a factory operating in the modern era, building anything without the use of industrial robotics. It's not going to happen. Half of industrial robots are in China. Half of the world's factory robots are inside of one country. And you're sending Janet Yellen to, this isn't something that happened overnight. Plan 2025 was a 10-year-old plan. You're sending her in 2024 to say, hey, cut back. Hey, stop producing. They have invested billions of dollars in the creation of these factories. Do you think for one moment they're going to stop production? No, these factories are going to hum along and pump out these EVs and pump out the types of goods that the world wants. And you're going to have to compete. And either you're going to have to make a better quality product or a cheaper product. And right now, when it comes to several of the products that people are afraid about that China is producing, the West is not producing a better quality product, and they're not producing a product at a lower price. And so that's going to spell a lot of trouble in the future. And the other area that there's going to be a lot of trouble in is the training of individuals. It's not all about replacing individuals. It's about having individuals who are trained to operate and to use the robotics and robots in order to do the manufacturing. Much of what you see in China is a workforce that is become used to the interaction between human and robot. And in so doing, they'll be able to do high-level manufacturing at lower cost, greater efficiency, greater quality. It's this combination. It's not the replacing of one. In some instances, there are replacements, but in other instances, it's the training of individuals to operate in tandem with the robots. And that's something that the West has not done it well in its education system. Its education system being so heavily based on politics, based on economics, based on creating classes of individuals. The Western economic system or education system is really a system that is hampered by its underpins of racial division and social division, black versus white, Hispanic versus black, upper class versus lower class, regional, rural versus urban. In that type of education system where the financing and underpinning of the quality of education is all depend on who you are, where you live, you're not producing the type of worker that is going to be able to compete at the level that is necessary for these economies to maintain and to compete in the global marketplace, given what's going on around the world. This is one of the things that we Yellen warns China against. Uh, Yellen warns China against flood of cheap green energy exports. Look at it. Why would you warn China against cheap green energy exports? Like for that China is going to, for some reason, stop exporting EVs. China has doubled down and has spent their time, their energy, their effort into the growth of this particular sector. China's automakers take the world by storm with the electric vehicle push. They're able to do that because of the investments that the government has made, not just in manufacturing, but in the technology, as well as their supply chains and their self-sufficiency. And so now you see companies, Ford just released this report that Ford is losing, they are losing billions of dollars on EVs that they can't sell, partially because the EVs were not high quality in some instances. And the other issue is that in other instances, the EVs were priced, you're talking about 100 grand for an EV. The price was so astronomical that it hindered the growth of the industry. It's clear that they are very competitive in the electric car value chain. I think they are a generation ahead of us. D'Amato told RTL Radio Monday, we need to catch up very, very quickly. A generation, not a decade. This is one of the automaker executives that is saying this, that this is an article in CNN. Chinese electric cars cheaper than models built elsewhere are making inroads in Europe, Australia, and Southeast Asia. Competitors worry that Chinese brands may eventually dominate the global EV market. The reality is this: if you want to compete, you got to compete. You've got to find a way to make a better product and a cheaper product. And putting F-150s on the market at $120,000 and those cars not nearly being as competitive in mileage, competitive in features as what could be gotten overseas is what's really creating this loss in the American EV market, and it's in the European EV market as well. They were more concerned on trying to fleece the public than they were on trying to make high quality cars at an affordable price. And this is the same thing that happened in the 80s, the same thing that when Toyota and Nissan swept the world. We're watching the same thing repeat itself again and again. How China's car companies built so wide a lead in the race to make EVs. It's because of government investment. It's because of strategic planning. It's because of seeing where the market was going and putting the necessary infrastructure in place to get ahead of it. The EV boom caught Western car companies asleep at the wheel. My question is this: if this happened in the 80s, if this has already happened in the West, why is it that we now have a situation where we're going back through the same thing that has already happened when they used to create fix or repair daily vehicles, where the cars were designed to fall apart so that you would just have to keep replacing this part and that part and another part and another part. And then the Asian cars swept the United States. All of a sudden was a crisis. The government had to step in and bail out the automakers again. It happened in 2008, bail out the automakers again. Now it's happening now. They tried to get into